Welcome to the Play-by-Play, a sports media talk show from Awful Announcing, where I watch so much political coverage on Tuesday night, Ben, that I genuinely don't know what the CFP rankings ended up being. I have no clue. I'm just going to willingly assume that this week never happened, and I will just check it out next week and pick it up there. I'm Brendon, Kleen, a staff writer at Awful Announcing. That over there is Ben Axelrod, a senior editor at Awful Announcing. Today, sports media election takeaways. Joel Embiid gets into it with a local columnist, and Bob Costas is bullied into retirement. Ben, how are you? How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. It was funny you mentioned the college football rankings, and that was, when you kind of look back on each election night throughout your life, at least in terms of the presidential elections, and remember certain things about them. And one thing I will certainly remember about Tuesday night was the CFP releasing its first rankings, and for a 12-team playoff too. So it was a much bigger deal than previous ones. And so, like, you have a lot of your timeline, and regardless of how you curate it, I think most of our timelines were pretty dedicated to the election on Tuesday night. But then, like, every fourth tweet was a super serious tweet about like where Penn State was ranked in the college football rankings. And so it read like performance art. Like, I think you could have made probably a SNL skit based on, college football writers being in their own little world. I get it. It comes with the territory. And in my past life as a college football writer, I probably would have been doing the same thing, but definitely one of the more bizarre aspects of the 2024 election coverage.
Yeah, Indiana, BYU, way too low. I think we can agree. We'll just we'll keep it moving though. Not a lot of Big 12 representation, so maybe that's why I wasn't seeing it quite as much out here in what now has become Big 12 country in Phoenix, Arizona. But let's get to it. So we recorded today on purpose, Ben. We usually record Tuesdays. We didn't want to just be flying blind with election night taking over everything. And I think what we've seen in the days leading up and the days after is about exactly what we would have expected, regardless of what we might have thought about the results, which is business as usual, I think. And it kind of leads me to, or it makes me think of something we talked about like 2-3 episodes ago when we were taking a pulse of how the election was kind of intersecting with sports media, and that this moment in time 8 years ago where it basically ignited a whole sports media news cycle that was years long of, can we talk about this? Whose side are you on? Athletes coming out versus not coming out, whatever the case might have been. It couldn't have been more different from that this time around, where everybody was more than vocal and the election just kind of played out, and we're already just seeing people basically go back to work and go back to normal and just kind of proceed accordingly. What have you made of how different it really was versus the first time that Donald Trump won?
It's night and day. I don't know, how well you remember the 2016 election. I'm guessing pretty well, but even the day after, the day the day after was just so bizarre. It was kind of this like, one, the win was so shocking to even Trump supporters that the Donald Trump won in 2016. And it was just this, where do we go from here? We just elected a reality show star as our president, and nobody saw it coming. And even Trump supporters were like, holy shit, like this actually happened.
Yeah,
it could not be more night and day. I mean, one, heading into this election, he was the betting favorite. There was a real preparedness to the fact that Donald Trump was going to win this election, I thought. And, going back to 2016 and the day after, like, it felt weird to talk about anything except the election and accept this impending reality that Donald Trump was about to become president. And you said it. I mean, Wednesday to the day after the election has been business as usual. I watched Get Up. I don't think I heard them reference the election once. I watched First Take. I don't recall them referencing the election, although they might have at one point when I wasn't paying super close attention. But it is just business as usual. It's you still have some of your intersection, but shut up and dribble, stick to sports, all of that was born out of 2016. And I think by and large, over the last 8 years, like that's the way it's played out, is largely we have separated our sports from our politics. And I think that's what you're ultimately seeing when it comes to the election coverage from a sports perspective.
So we talked before about how the opposition from a lot of the biggest hosts to Trump was just old news at this point. And there's already some of those voices kind of coming out of the woodwork. Dan Le Batard gave a monologue, and others, where I think it's just, whether you agree or disagree, the fact that this dude's been around for so long is just kind of making it boring or numb or whatever. It doesn't hit, it doesn't go viral, it's not interesting in the same way that it was. So I think that that's one aspect of it. But I think on the flip side, the difference that I sense when you look at some of the podcasts that Trump has appeared on that are sports tangential, Bussin' with the Boys and Joe Rogan and whatever else, is Trump support is much more normal than it was that time around, right? Like that was part of what was so goofy about Nick Bosa's handling of his stunt on NBC a couple of weeks back, of trying to kind of go back into recede after doing that, is like, bro, you can just go ahead, it's fine. And I just think back, I mean, right, like in 2016, it was like Brady with the hat in his locker, pretending like it wasn't there and not addressing it, and all these sorts of things. And now I think one change, if we kind of fast forward or look ahead to what maybe this era might look like differently than the last one when it comes to sports and sports media, is I think it won't be as contentious or taboo to voice that support. And I guess I kind of wonder, to come back to the shut up and dribble thing, is will there be that same energy in the other direction, or will some of, like, LeBron comes out with the video last week, right? I'm endorsing Kamala Harris, this like very well produced, like historical footage, the whole nine. Is somebody like him, or some of these big voices that have been so against Trump, are they going to speak out? Is that going to hit the same way, or is it going to be an eye roll the same way that a Le Batard rant might be? I think that's kind of the part that I'm curious about, because we didn't see it in the lead up, but now that he won, is it going to go back to this constant battle, or is it just that's who the president is, and effectively, like, I am just going to shut up and dribble, even if it's not like I'm backing down, but it's just like I don't have anything new to say.
It's funny because when we talked about Nick Bosa last week, my thought was, what's the big deal? Like, this is a mainstream political stance he's taking. It's not controversial to, like, right. And now that we've seen the reaction, it's the mainstream political stance. Like, the results of this election were overwhelming. It is not, you are not a contrarian for supporting Donald Trump in 2024. And so I do think it's going to die down, because I do think, one, like, as we get further from the election, it's just the idea of 4 more years just feels daunting if you are somebody who's going to be vocal about Donald Trump. I mean, if Dan Le Batard is going to be as vocal after the election as he was prior to the election, like, I would be concerned people are just going to tune him out. I don't think that, from what I've seen, even from people, look, I wanted Kamala Harris to win. Like, I think you can probably read between the lines there on my political leanings. It's just not what I want to hear today. I don't really want to wallow in it. I don't want to dissect it. It's just, I kind of want to push forward and just accept what's coming in these next 4 years. And so I do think you are going to see, and maybe that's exactly what people want on both sides, is just kind of a numbness to all of this. But I think that, I think it's going to be kind of back to normalized, like it was maybe pre 2016, where, you're going to have your people who are super outspoken on both sides, but by and large, people are going to look to sports as an escape, whether that's right or wrong.
I asked Le Batard when I interviewed him what it would look like, what his political commentary is going to look like. I would say he's probably the most visible sports media host weighing in on politics. Maybe Stephen A gets there more over time, depending on what this next ESPN deal looks like and where he kind of takes his career. I asked him, like, what does it look like if Kamala wins? He said, I'm going to be no less confused about what's happened in our country, and I'm not going to feel all that much better about where it is that our divisions are, especially if it's close. Well, it wasn't close, and she didn't win. So I wonder, for somebody like him, you're right. What does it even look like? People don't really care about politics outside of election years. I don't know. I think you're right. There's going to be far less of this outside of the huge moments that maybe break through if something crazy happens. But is that better or worse? I mean, I don't know. What do you think? Like, did there was the whole conversation about did ratings for the NFL go down in that 2016 election? There's been all sorts of, did the NBA's ratings go down because it went too woke? Like, we're kind of still dealing with the aftermath of that first one. You mentioned from like a personal standpoint that it's exhausting, but is it going to feel better to turn on sports and have that just be gone? I mean, I don't know it's kind of a personal taste thing more so than anything else, but where do you fall on that? Do you want this stuff in your sports or not?
Right now I don't. Right now I do, and maybe that makes me a giant hypocrite. But right now, like the results are in. Trump's going to be president for the next 4 years. Like I don't need constant reminders of it when I'm watching Get Up every morning. I do think though one thing
yeah, I don't know if they probably weren't the place for that.
Yeah, that's probably not
Greeny,
the best
not
example.
exactly.
Well, I'll go to Levitard then because I do. I mean, I'm a diehard Dan Levitard fan. I have tuned out a lot of his election coverage over the last year because it's been repetitive to me. It's one. I mean, and that's as somebody who largely agrees with most of his or at least his political leanings. I don't necessarily agree with all his stances, but as somebody who agrees, with his political leanings, like I've just found it exhausting, and it's not something I need to constantly be reminded of when I'm looking to his show as an escape from reality. I do think though one thing about, ironically, I'm pretty sure Shut Up and Dribble was born out of the Colin Kaepernick coverage. But that's where that all came from, right? There was this intersection of Trump criticizing NFL players and Colin Kaepernick. And so I do think it's very possible we could have situations like that over the course of the next 4 years. I do think the climate's a little tamer than it was in 2016 and 2017 when that was happening, but I'm not ruling that out. But
I feel like it's gonna have to come down to, like you're saying, if there's moments where the actual athletes collide with the administration in some way. I mean, like you said, that's really what happened. I mean, he called the players sons of bitches and told them to get out of the league, and then he was, had some words for LeBron James last time around, Trump did, and everything else. It's like that's what really elevated it. I mean, people like Levitard might have been paying closer attention to his comments about Ilhan Omar and things like that, but not the average person wasn't. The real reason these things became one and the same was because the politicians and the athletes kind of made it that way and gave everybody no real choice but to talk about it, right?
I wonder too, like how normalized this could become. Like it was a big deal whether championship teams would go to the White House or not. And you saw a lot of teams not do it. And now I wonder if it will just be like the norm. I wonder if it was, like a lot of college football coaches went and saw Obama when he was in office. And I think by and large, we can figure out that they were not fans of Obama's policies. I can think of a few off the top of my head who I covered, but I wonder like if this will just be totally normalized to the point where he's a president. He might not be popular, but he is, it's, respect the office or whatever that line is.
Yeah. We're just basically revisiting all those memories of the times when this stuff cropped up. And I guess the will they go to the White House thing was kind of a goofy subplot, but it definitely got attention when it happened. I mean, Trump appearing at sporting events was always major news, and yeah, it's gonna be very different. All right, I have a question for you that is much lower stakes here, Ben. But it's I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility. Actually, I'll split it into two. So Rachel Maddow got laughed at for referring to Steve Garvey incorrectly, and then we had Colin Allred in Texas. There's like sports figures are running for office constantly. Who do you think is the current sports figure? I mean, look, it's always guys that kind of fly under the radar. Who do you think it will be the next big one to run for office? Just give me something off the top of your head, and I will never hold you to this answer.
Aaron Rodgers.
Okay.
I mean, we already have a link there. Like his political beliefs. Yeah, he was in the running for it. I mean, I think looking back, that was probably a publicity stunt on RFK's side, but I think that he is defining himself the way a political figure would define himself. Now, would he run as a Republican? Would he run as a fringe third party candidate? I don't know, but when you asked me this question off air, like that was the first name that came to my mind was Aaron Rodgers, because I think in many ways he is built for this current political climate, in that he will say what he thinks, he believes, and he will stick to it. And he is already, I think, become very political as a current athlete. And I can't even imagine what it's going to look like once he does retire.
A lot of these guys are just so wealthy now that they don't need a second career the way that some of these other people did, right? Like that's one of the things where it's like, what is so-and-so going to do? Even it's not really a media conversation, but like, why are any of the best players in any sport now going to become coaches when they're done? They have no reason to work that hard unless they're just sickos. So that's one of the things where I'm like, it's probably somebody that we're not expecting. Like Steph Curry comes to mind or something like that. But like, come on, why is Steph Curry going to go be like a local house rep or something?
Right.
That's just a waste of his time. He can just, donate to millions of dollars and have meetings at his house with people and probably have more impact than he even would over there. So yeah, maybe it is just Rodgers who is so driven with the beliefs that he does have to actually lower himself to the menial work of actually being like an elected official. Maybe he would actually be driven to do it. Okay, the other one is, what sports media figure would run for office? As we palate cleanse our way out of our politics conversation and jump over to the other topics for today.
I think the most obvious answer would probably be Stephen A. Smith, because you would think he has the bravado to think he could be president. And like, if Stephen A. Smith were to run for office, I would expect it to be for president. I could not see him running for governor or senator. Like, I think if Stephen A. Smith is going to run anywhere, it's going to be for president. I wonder, I don't know if I want to take this in this direction. I wonder if somebody could convince Pat McAfee to do it, because I think that I could see some political figure thinking Pat McAfee is the type of figure who has appealed to both parties, who has largely played it down the middle, who hails from the Midwest, has, ties to Pennsylvania and West Virginia and basically all of the Midwest at this point, obviously Indiana. And I don't know. I could just, for some reason, those were the two names that came to mind. Maybe it's because they're the two biggest stars at ESPN, but Stephen A. Smith and Pat McAfee are the two names that come to mind.
I don't think Pat would do it. I don't think he has interest in actually engaging with all of that. As much as he might express his beliefs from time to time, he does seem pretty damn, anti-establishment at the end of the day, beyond anything else.
It would also be a lot of criticism. He'd have to face a lot of criticism.
Also true. Okay, I didn't give my sports figure answer, and they're not athletes, but that one was The Rock. Still think that could happen. He's universally popular, has very much staked out a position as more affiliated with the right and conservatism lately, whereas before he kind of wanted to be everybody's favorite guy. And if he's doing that, maybe that eventually leads to somebody tapping him on the shoulder and suggesting it. Also, Mark Cuban seems like a lock at some point. He was out campaigning for Kamala. He doesn't own the Mavs anymore. I feel like we should get ready for some sort of something there. Sports media, Emmanuel Acho.
Okay, I see that.
He's has no qualms about giving his thoughts on social issues and political topics when called upon, and he likes to talk, and that is something an athlete or a politician definitely needs to be able to do. So that would be my answer there, Emmanuel Acho.
He's willing to play the game. Like, he has given the game away when it comes to sports media. And so if you're willing to do it, with those stakes, I don't see any reason why he wouldn't be willing to do it on the on the bigger stage. What about Steve Kerr? Like, Steve Kerr feels like an obvious name.
Yeah, he's getting up there, He just
Yeah, I
signed an
get
extension. He's going to be coaching for a while. Age might just be the only reason we don't see it for him, but I mean the story's there. The assassinated father, and he speaks really eloquently about that and has the plug in there. He's been pretty involved and active on the left with the elections over the past few years. I think he could get support. I mean, especially look, if he just runs in the area he lives currently, I think it's not exactly hard to win if you're a Democrat. So
no.
yeah, there you go. Steve Kerr, all these people did they have your vote, Ben? Did we find the next wonderful leaders of our country here?
Maybe The Rock. I don't hold
Okay.
me to that, but maybe The Rock.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Acho's got my vote. So if he moves to
Okay.
Phoenix or something and runs, I'm committing now. I'm endorsing him.
Okay. Well, let's get into it with our next topic. Let's stick to sports a little bit more here, although there is some crossover here, I feel like, when it comes to sports figures intersecting with media figures, which has been a reoccurring theme over the course of the last week. And we have a handful of examples here, but I think the most obvious one is obviously Joel Embiid. For the uninitiated, Joel Embiid, Philadelphia 76ers, often injured center, got into it with a Philadelphia Inquirer columnist named Marcus Hayes. Marcus had written a column criticizing Embiid for missing the start of the season with a knee injury. This has obviously become a reoccurring thing with Embiid and his availability or lack thereof. But in this column, Marcus Hayes wrote, he invoked Embiid's late brother and his son. The gist of the column, I don't have it in front of me to quote directly, was basically, you talk about playing for these people. Well, what kind of example or how are you doing that when you're not even actually playing? And so Embiid had a moment during his press availability last Friday where he took aim at the media, said, I've done too much for this effing city. I believe he name dropped Marcus Hayes by name at that point, but Marcus wasn't there. Yeah. And then Saturday after the Sixers game, there was some sort of physical altercation between Embiid and Hayes regarding the column. Joel Embiid suspended 3 games as a result of the NBA's investigation into the matter. There's no video of it that's been made public, but there have been, multiple accounts of what happened from other Philadelphia 76ers beat writers. So, Brendon, like, the reaction to this, I think, has largely been supportive of Embiid for standing up to a reporter for invoking his late brother and his son in a column. And I think most agree that Marcus Hayes crossed a line with that column. But you also obviously have people who think that Embiid went too far and that violence is never the answer in these situations. Where do you come out on this?
I was surprised at how much support Embiid got, to be honest with you. I mean, maybe that's just sort of online, like a different generation coming through, but I even kind of, it felt like I watched Pardon the Interruption's response to this, the oldest of old guard, right? And like even they were kind of like, I get it, but he probably shouldn't have pushed him, Obviously, we all get it. The column crossed the line. I don't understand how an editor or anybody at the Philadelphia Inquirer allowed that to go through. There was no broader point within him doing that. It was just personal. He didn't even try to make a useful point off of the family stuff that he referenced. And I thought, I think part of the reason for this is, despite how exhausted everybody might be with Embiid and the injury stuff, I thought Kyle Neubeck at PHLY wrote a good column. I couldn't read all of it because it was paywalled, but he posted some of the screenshots of his own writing on Twitter, and he basically explained that like the late brother was somebody that Embiid hadn't been able to contact and see or contact. Like they had not seen each other spend time together since Embiid left outside of one visit to come to the United States, and he died tragically before they could really ever have time together again once Embiid started to break through in high school and at Kansas and with the Sixers. So that's what Embiid's talking about when he's saying I've given so much. And so not only was it inappropriate for the columnist to invoke that in the first place, but he also didn't even seem to actually have done the research to kind of get why Embiid references that as such a key and core part of his story the way that he does. It's not just somebody out there saying, I play for my family, like every athlete would say if you asked them. It's really truly that there's like a memory he's trying to uphold, that he went to go compete overseas and basically sacrificed a relationship with a close family member who he eventually never had a relationship with after that. And so you can obviously follow along, but I still was surprised that athlete pushes reporter was kind of like, yeah, that makes sense. Like that, it just that if you had just said that to me in a vacuum without any of that context, I would have been very surprised. But maybe we all just know Embiid's story so much and everything else that he uniquely was kind of somebody who we would side with.
I think even the 3-game suspension feels light. Like, I think that if you're the NBA
Agreed.
and you want to set like this standard when it comes to interactions between the media and the player on both sides, 3 games for a player getting physically involved with a reporter feels very light to me. And so that I think that kind of speaks to all of this is I think that one, my biggest takeaway is something you already said is what is going on at the Philadelphia Inquirer when it comes to your editorial process that something like this slips through the cracks? Like, do you not have an editorial process? Is this something that nobody picked up on as being a super personal jab that added absolutely nothing to the column? If you read that column, it reads perfectly fine and has a scathing column of Joel Embiid's lack of availability if you take out the pot shots about his son and his late brother. So that was my first takeaway is, and maybe that's just super journalistic brained of me to think like, why the hell is the Philadelphia Inquirer publishing this? But then I also, maybe to the same journalistic side of my brain, thought like, yeah, you can't be assaulting reporters. You can't be physically, regardless of what they write. But if there is something that were to stir something in somebody, I would understand how it could be what Marcus Hayes wrote. So I guess I understand kind of the muted response to it, as strange as it seems. But it does, I think, speak to this moment we're in when it comes to the media and the subjects they cover. And I guess the Jason Kelce thing wasn't really that because it wasn't a reporter, but even Jason Kelce getting involved with a fan and smashing his phone after a fan used a homophobic slur to describe Travis Kelce, that to me, like, it's just kind of this, like, I don't know even how to describe it. We're just at this weird moment when it comes to how athletes and celebrities, which I guess Jason Kelce is at this point, how they interact with the general public at large and what we're willing to tolerate when it comes to those interactions on both sides.
Yeah, there probably is something to athletes being a little less manicured and kind of proper with how they're going to handle these types of situations, right? And so I think you can kind of draw the connection, even though Jason Kelce, it wasn't a reporter. It's just like you're saying, kind of the crossing of a line and how the athlete handles that. And I think that, yeah, Stephen A. Smith and Kevin Durant was also a big story this past week where the leadership conversation around Durant comes up again, and Durant responds in the locker room post game last week and to The Athletic basically calls Stephen A. clown and questions his kind of journalistic credentials and goes very purposefully. Nothing new for Kevin Durant, but again, kind of you're crossing a line and I'm not going to put up with it anymore. And I don't know, I guess it doesn't surprise me. I always just kind of go to the increase in athletes in the media when I think of this stuff, because I think that is just kind of this representation of we don't have to take the status quo nonsense of what we perceive as being kind of lied about, mistreated, wronged in some way. And I think all of these examples are kind of just showing that level of fed up. And I think you would probably say that all of the reactions tended to lean toward the athlete. And if you want to talk punishment, Jason Kelsey's not even getting one from ESPN. So that kind of tracks with Embiid and the 3-game suspension. I think public opinion is really on the side of these athletes at this point, where for one reason or another, we kind of get it when they get fed up.
It is. You're right about that. I do think the Stephen A. Smith, Kevin Durant one is maybe the exception, although I don't know. I mean, what's the reaction in Phoenix? Are people siding with Kevin Durant over this? Because I mean, again, just somebody with a journalistic history here. I thought Kevin Durant was like dead wrong in that entire situation.
How did you think he was dead wrong?
I thought that he was, when he's calling out Stephen A. Smith for not attending practices and not attending shoot-arounds and things of that nature, that's not Stephen A. Smith's role. Stephen A. Smith is not a beat writer. Stephen A. Smith has been a beat writer. And as Stephen A. Smith brought up in his response to Kevin Durant, he has done those things, and he has done them throughout Kevin Durant's career. It's just not his current role now. And so I thought that Kevin Durant was kind of trying to cherry pick on some low-hanging fruit that didn't even really apply to what his actual criticism was.
I think the issue there is that there's the topic around leadership that comes up so much with Durant, and the lack of, I think, heft behind Stephen A's kind of accusations there. He's not saying, I reached out to former teammates recently and they told me this, or let me tell you a story about Golden State and how, I mean, we know some of the history, of course, but it almost feels like Stephen A is kind of relying on those blow up moments and the deterioration in Golden State or different things like that to just kind of be a stand-in for an actual new observation or analysis. And I think that's why KD was saying, you know, you didn't go ask Devin Booker to talk about that. You didn't go ask Mike Budenholzer, my head coach, how the leadership is looking right now. You're just kind of playing on the general public's thoughts about me to kind of dunk on me a little bit. And I think that that's where KD does get tired. He is an incredibly aware athlete of the public perception of him, and I don't think that that does him any favors. But in this case, people in the NBA media these days, I do think, just go straight to he wants to be traded and he's not a good leader, absent of anything else. Meanwhile, the Suns are 6-1. The dude's playing great. So I can see the defensiveness, and I think that's kind of where he was coming from. But of course, how surprising would it be if Stephen A strolled up to a Suns practice? Like, come on, you know, right. You're right.
Yeah, I do think that one issue with Durant, and maybe that's where my biases fall, is he just has kind of lost the benefit of the doubt in these situations because he has been so sensitive to any sort of criticism. My other thing, and I wrote up the story for Awful Announcing about the mainly about Stephen A's response on First Take on Monday, is I think both of them are kind of playing into this. I think both of them know this plays into their brand and know that this is what people expect from them. And like, look, it's one thing for Kevin Durant to give a quote to The Athletic and to kind of take down Stephen A. Smith. It's another for him to be responding to clips of First Take on Twitter or X or whatever. And I think that Kevin Durant knows exactly what he's doing when he makes these public replies. So that was, as I wrote it up.
Now he has cheerleaders who go, "Oh, my favorite athlete ever online," and blah, blah, blah. He knows that he's kind of turned the burner stuff into like a positive PR thing for himself. And he definitely knows he's going to get some hype if he does it.
I mean, I think if you look at I'll try to stall here as I pull it up, but as you look at our coverage of him, even from the Olympics, when he was, tweeting through the Olympics, we had our headline on this story about him responding to people during the Olympics is Kevin Durant draws attention for GOAT behavior at 5 a.m. on X. Like, this is like, he is the online athlete of our time. And so, like, I think
And
that
just like anyone else who's too online, it's not a good thing. Like,
no,
I understand it's entertaining, but I cover the Suns, and so let me just say, like, from personal experience, this guy knows what is being said about him, no matter how big or small the platform might be. That's not good for anybody. You know what I mean? Imagine if you were like calling your family members constantly and saying, "Hey, when I was at your house the other day, was I weird? Did I do something wrong?" Like, how's so and so, how's Aunt so and so feeling about? Like, come on, like we all know that's not healthy, and especially for these people who are already under such a bright microscope and constantly being scrutinized, it cannot be a good thing. I wanted to throw this at you. Um, with back to Embiid. Do you attribute so before any of this, like you mentioned, he's out. He's hurt, and that kind of started the criticism of him, but it also has just been this other kind of looming storyline before it got into the media. And there's this trend already in the NBA season that viewership is just in the bottom of what it could be. I mean, you can point to election, you can point to early season, it kind of always gets swallowed up by the NFL. But we're talking 50% decreases year over year in some of these national slots and things like this. And a lot of the conversation I did see when you watch these sports shows, Ben, is about if Kawhi Leonard was the old stalking horse, I think we're kind of over it now. Embiid is the guy that gets the criticism of players don't want to play. We never know who's going to be on the court. We're wasting our money when we try to go to games. The stars are whatever, this and that. Do you feel like that can be directly attributed to the NBA viewership struggles, or is that too simplified? Is that too reductive?
I think it's a part of it. I think that if you were to look at the 2024-25 season and you were like to scratch out which teams are interesting, like which team would you want to watch on a Thursday night on TNT? If you just were to look at the rosters based on NBA 2K, like you would put the Clippers and you would put the Sixers on that list. But the reality is you don't know who's going to be playing for those teams on any given night. And there's a big drop off if you just remove Paul George from the equation. Or I think that's maybe a part of it too for the Sixers and Embiid, is that Paul George has had some of this too. And now he's a part of the Sixers. And so now you're kind of just like writing off this team that was supposed to be one
And I
of the
think
bigger
the
threats.
announcement ahead of time, hey, I'm not going to be playing back to backs. I just played in the Olympics, and the playoffs before that, but oh, by the way, that same injury is going to keep me out. It was almost like he was too transparent. If they had just gone game by game, I think it would have been less of a story.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, you're talking about Embiid, right?
Embiid, yeah.
Yeah. And so I also think there was kind of, the thing where he played in the Olympics and everybody's kind of like,
Yeah.
why is this guy playing in the Olympics when he never plays for his team? It feels like, and it was the same thing with Kawhi until Kawhi seemingly got sent home. But I do think there is this question of like, if the players don't care about the regular season, why should the fans care about the regular season? And I think you've seen some of that we'll get into the playoffs and it's like, well, now the Lakers are the 7th seed, but they also might be the number 2 team in the West, when it comes to favorites to win the title. That was a few years ago, but I do think there's this question of how much do the players care about the regular season? And if they don't care, why should the fans?
Yeah, it's just always fast. This is one way where I feel like it's not so much the actual issue now that is the problem that makes fans have a perception about the NBA. It's the media's response to that trend that is just sticking in fans' minds. And that is a tough one to overcome because it just is the narrative about the NBA right now, right? Like before a season even starts, it's already just let me cherry pick all the athletes who aren't playing for whatever reason and talk about how I wish they were and I'm not interested because they aren't playing and things like that. And that's a big problem for the NBA to overcome, regardless of signing a new broadcast deal and whatever else, is just what do people think about your sport? And the NFL, every weekend, there's several quarterbacks out. There's several games that are borderline unwatchable, but that's just not what gets attention. We're just going to talk about, Chiefs Bucks, cool ending, fun game. Hopkins goes off in his first game as a Chief and kind of figure it out. Meanwhile, the Bucks have like no receivers and all that. It's funny. I know the differences. Those are real injuries versus the perception that in the NBA it's fake injuries. But I'm more just talking about or exaggerated or overly managed injuries. But it's just it's always been interesting to me that this whole who are we even gonna see? What's even the value of turning on a game? And yet you'll sit there and watch Joe Flacco on a Sunday and not miss a beat.
Yeah, I think one you hit on it is the perception of if a quarterback misses a game because he's actually hurt, as opposed to if a quarterback I mean, look at what happened with Anthony Richardson. He missed one play and it became a national story in the NFL.
Yeah, that was pretty NBA-ish, I guess, right? And he kind of got slammed the same way that an Embiid would.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think there is kind of this, and I don't attribute this to load management as much as I attribute it to LeBron James. Is there is this perception that the regular season does not matter when it comes to the postseason. And I think you would have, these LeBron teams that would, especially in Cleveland, his second time around, that would take all season to figure it out. And you'd enter the postseason and like the Raptors and the Hawks would be favored to win the East. And then LeBron would just blow through the East. And you saw it with the Raptors and Kawhi when Kawhi went through his load management season there and then won the NBA title. And I think you're seeing it now. The Lakers a few years ago did it. It's just this idea of let's just get to the playoffs and then we'll figure it out.
As an 8 seed.
Yeah. And
finals, even Jimmy kind of slow rolling things.
I mean, I'm a Cleveland Cavaliers fan. They're having an incredible start to the season. If they're not the most fun team in the NBA right now, they're second or third. And yet there's also kind of this nagging perception of, okay, will any of this translate to the postseason? And for whatever reason, that affects the NBA more than it seems to affect any of the other sports.
I think it's been brutally obvious that the NBA needs to shorten its schedule for a very long time at this point. And I think that, to be honest with you, Adam Silver's kind of legacy as a commissioner at this point is going to be riding on if he does anything about that. I think it is, it's obvious that is the fix that we all need. It would make the games more valuable, each one. It would help reduce the load and probably make players less susceptible to and less focused on managing any sort of pain and injuries. And it might even help with some of the travel and scheduling and putting more national games and all this sort of stuff that would go a long way if you can just convince the owners to be a little bit more long-term with their thinking versus let me just get the gate revenue year by year. So it's not going to go away. We'll keep an eye on NBA viewership, I think, once the NFL season ends and some of this election stuff is out of the way and really get a benchmark. But let's get to our final segment here. Bob Costas has been retiring from play-by-play on Turner Networks and MLB Network, where he had kind of had this last major role in sports media, obviously called several World Series and was the host of Sunday Night Football and Olympics and I think golf and tennis at various points and everything else. His quote to MLB Network, I think on Wednesday when we're recording, was, "I felt that I couldn't consistently reach my past standard. There might have been individual games or stretches within games or moments in games that were just the same as if it was the 1990s or the early 21st century." I love his wording. He talks like he's writing a book every time he opens his mouth. It's great. But I couldn't string enough of them together. I don't talk about my life in terms of what I was doing in the early 21st century. I typically just say what age I was, Ben. But setting that aside, the dude got absolutely crushed the past couple playoffs, calling games for TBS. And he said he kind of knew that this was going to be the last year. Do you believe that? Do you think that he really was aiming for retirement now? Or do you think that this criticism was what ended up forcing his hand here?
I think he probably had an idea it could be. And I think the reaction to his coverage of the Yankees Royals series probably solidified it. There was a lot of backlash. I mean, we wrote about it, how obsessed he seemingly was with George Brett just attending the Yankees Royals games. And I think that, he's obviously somebody who's sensitive and aware of criticism. And so if the overwhelming reaction to your coverage is negative, then even for somebody as accomplished as he is and who, could have had this job until he didn't want to have it anymore, then I think it's kind of academic that it would be time for him to hang it up.
Did you think the criticism was warranted? Like personally, when you, I don't know if you like watched full games or just saw the clips like everybody else, but did it feel fair or did it just feel like a pile on?
It felt like what you would expect from him. It felt like
Yeah, that's a
his,
good way to put it.
I think that it was Bob Costas calling a playoff game. And so, yeah, if George Brett is in the stands, he's going to be hung up on George Brett and he's going to let you know how much he knows about George Brett. And he's going to, go back to everything from the 70s and 80s and 90s that he has stockpiled in his incredible mind about George Brett. But yeah, I mean, I didn't find it super, but I'm not a Yankees or Royals fan, so I guess it wouldn't bother me the same way it might have bothered, especially Yankees fans, I guess. But it was definitely unique. It definitely stood out as not your typical play-by-play guy calling the game, and so I guess to that end, it's just a matter of your preference. If you find that irritating and grating, then I can definitely understand why you feel that way. And if you're somebody who appreciates the history of the game the way Bob Costas does, then I could see the other side of it as well. So I didn't have like a strong stance on him and his performance, but I understand the negative reaction.
So when you talk about history, it's funny because it's like now it's history, right? But in real time, the dude was celebrated in his time for contextualizing like the present too, right?
Mhm.
Like that, like even just format wise, there's not as many opportunities for people to do that anymore, right? Like when he did kind of hang it up, Kevin Clark had a clip go viral. We all have celebrated with the NBC getting the NBA again. Some of those intro montage essays that he would do, and he did a lot of that during the Olympics, of course. And so I can see being kind of tired of it when it's like always backward looking. There's no space for him to do it now, present looking. And so maybe it had just run its course for Costas specifically, but I guess I just kind of wonder like is that even, does anyone want that anymore? Like setting Costas aside, it's like, or is it just, it kind of feels like we have traded the storytelling for just kind of hype. We just want people to get us excited about games. And I think the announcers, the shows, the people who do that the best are the ones who kind of are in vogue right now.
I think it was also a weird fit with Turner because he wasn't calling the World Series. And so if that's his thing, right, that he contextualizes the present and from a historical perspective and all that, at the end of the day, it's the ALDS. It's not the World Series. And so maybe if he was calling the World Series and he was able to put into perspective like what the Dodgers and Shohei Ohtani and all these major stars all in the same field for the same World Series, what that meant, maybe it'd be different. But when it is, Royals Yankees first round of the playoffs, that then it just doesn't, it feels forced a little bit. It doesn't feel like the same magnitude or same gravitas that it would if he was calling the World Series. So I guess from that perspective, it was always just kind of a strange fit to me when he was covering first round playoff series. But yeah, look, I think ideally that is what you want from a broadcaster is you do want them to set the stage. You do want them to put into perspective historic moments and things of that nature. But look, that's easier said than done. And it's why Bob Costas stands out the way that he does from a broadcasting history perspective.
Yeah, he stands out. He's a legend, so it's hard to say. But do you feel like there's like a, oh, that guy's in the Costas mold? Because that's part of what I'm saying here is like I don't think that there's like a a a minor league of that. You know what I mean? There's not,
Right.
that guy's trying to do what Costas did, whereas I could probably say that about maybe some other people, match them up to their historical counterpart in some kind of way, shape, or form. Whereas, like, I can say who's the John Madden of right now. We might be able to debate that, but I don't see a Bob Costas who's sitting there kind of weaving a story into a broadcast like that.
Do you think Jim Nance does it at all?
How much younger is Jim Nance than Bob Costas?
Oh, not. I mean, if
So
I'd set the betting line at like 5 years. I can look it up
So
right
I, but
now.
so yes, but like especially with golf and things, I think he's good at that. But I'm more talking like
He's 7 years
Davis
younger.
wasn't doing that. Like you talk about
Yeah.
the World Series, right? He had the call that was a throwback to Vince Scully, but he wasn't really doing that with the broadcast so much. And I don't see. I like a lot of young broadcasters, but again, I kind of feel like it's the energy and the hype more so than it is the story, or in some cases it's just straight up entertaining, right? Like I mean, inside the NBA is not sitting there telling you about all the history of the game you're about to watch. They're just kind of goofing around and giving takes.
Yeah, because this isn't something that Bob Costas is like just known for now. This is Bob Costas was doing this in the 90s. I mean,
Yeah.
Bob Costas called the 1997 World Series between the Cleveland Indians and Florida Marlins. And I know the big knock on him from, I actually know this from listening to Lebitard. I wasn't aware of it at the time, but the big knock on him from Marlins fans was that he was rooting for the Indians because he didn't want a team that was just 4 years old to win the World Series wearing teal uniforms. At least that's what Marlins fans
He
think. And
literally
so
said after Jordan shot over Byron Scott, if this is the final shot of Michael Jordan's career, which like it's a cool call in hindsight, but like the dude hadn't even acknowledged his own retirement yet, and you're already kind of making the moment.
Yeah. So I mean, so he's 72, so that was roughly 30 years ago. Yeah, I mean, I don't see any 40-year-olds doing that right now. I don't. So yeah, to your point, like he's kind of one of one in that sense. I don't. Maybe somebody will emerge. Maybe we are totally just like omitting somebody right now who does do this. But when you said it, like you're right. Jim Nance was like the first name that came to mind, and he's 65 years old.
Yeah, it's interesting. I do think it's a shift in what people want, and so shout out to Bob Costas. I mean, the best of the best of him is really impressive. I thought the show he did twice, the on the record and then back on the record at HBO. There's some great stuff that came out of that. He definitely
His
contributed
Vince
a ton.
McMahon interview.
Yeah,
And
which
he's
got some shine in the Netflix doc. Yeah.
he's not humorless either. If you want to see an example of him not being humorless, as he has been accused of, go check out his appearance on the Dan Lebitard show last week, because he ran down his credentials when it comes to not being humorless, and it was pretty funny.
Okay, finally, our hot mic, where we each throw something out that caught our eye, that we geeked out about, that we loved, that we hated from the week of sports media. I'll start us off, Ben. I have a question similar to my which guy is going to run for office question earlier. The NFL subreddit last week was debating a question that I think we throw out often about the NFL, but that right now is probably harder to answer than ever, which is, to the average person, who is the most recognizable non-quarterback? So it's not immediately a media question, but I think the media coverage of the sport and kind of whose face is out there and most present is a big part of the answer that we might each have. I'll tell you some of the answers people had, but the caveat first and foremost is we cannot say Travis Kelce. That's
Okay.
not
I was going to
on
say
the table.
that's the obvious answer.
So in the past, I think some answers might have been like Gronk, Richard Sherman, maybe at one point or another. Odell Beckham is in the league still. Maybe he's still the answer, but I don't know how many people are thinking about him anymore. There's probably many others that I'm not thinking of. Marshawn Lynch probably could have been an answer you might have used here at one point. Who is it right now? Who is if somebody who's vaguely aware of the NFL enough that they would even know players in the league, of course, but not some kind of diehard who could name 15 guys on each team. Who's the most recognizable non-quarterback in the NFL?
So I had 4 names come to mind before I realized the answer was Jason Kelce or Travis Kelce. The 4 names I thought of were Justin Jefferson, Tyreek Hill, Myles Garrett, and Micah Parsons. Those were the 4 that stood out to me as guys who, I mean, I think they're still best known as football players, but have kind of transcended the sport into at least some sort of space where they are well known enough outside of the NFL that you would consider them celebrities.
So I think another answer from the past that I forgot to say, JJ Watt probably
Hmm.
you could have said. It's yeah, those four names definitely came up in the Reddit thread. I don't know what my answer is. Like straight up, I don't I hear you on those four. I don't know if like my mom knows who those four people are at all.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? It's precarious for sure. Like I think a lot of people throw out Christian McCaffrey
that was one. Yeah.
on Reddit. I thought about Debo Samuel, but I don't think he's really there. Yeah, I mean like Derrick Henry, no. I mean, he's in the
Mm-mm.
Taco Bell commercial right now, but other than that, like
Yeah.
I don't think most people know who he is. Um
I think Justin Jefferson probably has the most commercials. But to your point, like, I don't know, does anybody know like Justin Jefferson other than just like, hey, that guy's a really good wide receiver? I guess Micah Parsons does have the podcast and he's a
yeah.
Dallas Cowboy, which always adds some extra umph. My Miles Garrett one was because he had the helmet incident. And so there was at least
Yeah.
like some
Yeah.
mainstream coverage of him a few years ago. Maybe TJ Watt, if people just confuse him with JJ, but uh
I
yeah,
think
I
my
don't
answer is Tyreek Hill.
that
Obviously,
makes
no unfortunate with the police incident, but even before that, being on the Chiefs, highlight plays, he's outspoken, fun dude in press conferences and things like that. Then he did have the controversy coming into the league. Some of it's negative, some of it's positive, I guess, but you end up with a guy that I would think a lot of people know.
let me spin this. Is Travis Kelce more famous than any of the quarterbacks?
Not Rodgers, I don't think. I mean, it's just hard because it's like the Taylor Swift factor. Everybody knows his name, but like,
See, I think it would be between him and Mahomes at this point. I think it's just a matter of which Kansas City Chief do you think is more famous? And I kind of think it's Kelce.
yeah, that's probably true. You probably have to just because of the Swift factor and how much attention he's gotten. But maybe I'm thinking of it more in terms of like we know more about Rodgers, but probably more total people know and would recognize Travis Kelce than any quarterback. Honestly, I
Yeah.
think. Yeah.
I think it's Kelce. I actually think Kelce was getting there before the Taylor Swift thing, and
Yeah.
the Taylor Swift relationship feels like a cheat code to all of this because she is like one of the three most famous people in the world. To tie this all back to the start of the conversation about Donald Trump, but I think that
Maybe Travis
yeah,
Kelce's the answer for who's going to run for office.
I could not see that, but
No,
yeah, maybe.
I don't actually believe it. I think he wants to like be in movies and live an
Yeah,
easy life, and I don't blame him.
yeah. All right,
All right,
my hot
what's
mic.
yours?
Yeah. I had a tweet on election night and you responded to it, which I always like when you respond to my tweets because it lets me know you haven't muted me yet, which I would not fault anybody for muting me on social media. I just tweet through it all the time. I appreciate Kevin Durant from that aspect, but I watched election night coverage like most of America. I watched it as a multi-screen experience, one on my phone and one on the television. On the phone, I was scrolling through X, and the coverage could not be more different. Like I got done putting my son to bed at about 9 p.m. Eastern time. So I came out and turned on the coverage on television, and my initial reaction was, wow, nothing's changed. Like we're still waiting for all these results to come in. I look at my phone, it is doom and gloom. It is Trump has won. It is this
Yeah.
is over. You can call it. Like there is no way that Kamala could come back from any of this based on the early indications we had. And I've done this long enough that I always know that television kind of lags behind social media. By the time I fell asleep, sometime around midnight Eastern, it had not caught up by any means. Like they were still treating this on all the networks on MSNBC, on CNBC, on CNN, on all of the on Fox, on although Fox was a little more obviously leaning in what direction it was heading, but Amazon, like all of these networks were treating this like it was a wide open race and just taking like Kamala's memo to her staff that, hey, we're still waiting on the blue wall to come in at face value as well. I guess we have to wait for the results in Pennsylvania to come in, when it was clear to anybody with a social media account that this thing was over by 10 p.m. Eastern time. And so I don't know. Like, I don't know if I can watch television coverage when it comes to the election anymore, because it was so distanced from reality that I don't know what the value was in any of it.
It's a bad experience for sure. I feel like there's a few like reasons for it. One, I think just the format of trying to keep up with that stuff while you're also anchoring a show, and are the producers supposed to be like keeping up with Twitter and then giving you stuff? It's like, because it's coming so fast and quick, it's like it's not really anything concrete. It's almost like the sum of all of the information on a place like Twitter just gives you an impression. But what would you say on a broadcast to kind of keep up? I think some of it's just logistical. I also think some of it is these places want to call and project based on their own data team, their own production staff. They don't want to go off. If it's NBC wants to call it, and then they're not going to talk about it a moment before. So then they're waiting for their team to do it, even though Fox might have already called it or the AP might have already called it. And you just get into a massive mess. And then there's also the more like conspiratorial angle of like, they want to make us keep watching. So of course they're not going to tell us it's over.
Right. And I understand all that. And like, to me, that's where my mind went. But just comparing it to sports, like if you were watching a college football game and it was 35-0 at halftime, and then you got to the halftime show and none of the studio team was like talking about the actual outcome of the game, and they were just like, well, we'll find out in a few hours who won. That would be
like
insane.
Watching the primetime Olympics coverage.
Right.
That's what it's like, where you're like, I guess I'll just tune in and kind of go through it, but I know Usain Bolt is about to just run laps around these dudes. What am I really here for other than just kind of having something on to experience it? But I think most people at this point, if they're on Twitter, the TV is background noise, and you're just chugging tweets at that point. Like that's how I experience it. And then I think there's more and more like online stuff and whatever of content creators kind of filling the void of a little bit more of a real-time experience, but it does suck. There's no argument.
It feels weird when the outcome feels like ancillary to the entire thing.
Did you watch the Amazon thing, or did you just list it off as one of the places it was happening?
So I checked in on the Amazon thing. They were actually having some, it seemed like, technical difficulties when I tuned in. I listened to Tara Palmieri, going back to our previous conversations about the Ringer and their podcasts. Like, I listened to Somebody's Got to Win. So I was kind of pumped that Tara Palmieri was going to be on that, but she kind of seemed more to be a contributor than she was like a main part of the coverage, at least when I was watching. So I didn't tune in for too long there.
I heard it was very like low production quality and kind of awkward. I didn't tune in because once I saw that, I'm like, all right, I'm good. But it was an interesting experiment for them that kind of caught my attention, for them to basically just pay Brian Williams and like pay a production team to just do content for them. But I don't know if in sports they're doing it the more traditional way. So maybe
I'll tell you one embarrassing moment I had last night, and this speaks to the average American voter, I suppose. Is I was pumped like everybody else to watch Steve Kornacki and do his thing, Yeah. And so I tuned in what I thought was MSNBC's coverage. And after a while, I was like, where the hell is Steve Kornacki, and why are they talking about Bitcoin so much? And I had been watching CNBC for probably an hour at that point. So
I believe Peacock had a Kornacki cam.
They did.
Just him. And if he wasn't talking, you were just watching him like on his computer or on his notebook, just sort of taking it all in like you were. And then every so often he would just speak, and then you got some information. Very strange.
At one point I tuned into that, and it felt too Truman Showy for me. So I had to go back to CNBC.
We need like a Mike Pereira cam, or the sports equivalent, I think, would be like the rules analysts just having a camera trained on them, or whatever Jay Feely does for CBS, where he talks about kicks twice a game.
Yeah.
Maybe have a camera on him. All right, that'll wrap us up. Don't forget to hit follow or subscribe wherever you're finding the show. Check out awfulannouncing.com. We got content on all this stuff minute by minute throughout the week. Also follow us across social media at Awful Announcing, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok even, and much more. We will see you next Wednesday. Enjoy your week.